I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast, where we dive into the science of health and wellbeing.
Well, hello, Dr. Morton. It's great to see you again. It's been a few.
I'm seeing you from the other side of the planet now, aren't I?
Absolutely. We were. I mean, we've always recorded this remotely. Last time we recorded, we were in the same country. This time, we're in different countries. And I want to tell you about a lovely experience that I had yesterday. Even though we're in different countries, it's the same day. So yesterday morning for me, which was Sunday morning, we took a walk in one of the local parks here in Madrid, Spain. In English, it's called West Park. Very, very big city park. And it was absolutely marvellous because right in the midst of the city, you could walk no more than 3 or 4 minutes into this park. You could, once you were there, not see any city buildings, not hear any city traffic, and be completely surrounded by the green of the trees and the blue of the sky. And you could walk continuously for probably 40 minutes in that way. It was just wonderful, just wonderful. Well, it's coincidental that I think that's what we're going to be talking about today.
It is, because blue and green should often be seen. And you're seeing it in Spain, possibly more than we're seeing in Australia. But so you don't get homesick, brother, and so that you don't forget us here, I have a little reading for you. And I love this. Bill Bryson, one of my I enjoy his works, and this is a little passage from his book called "In a Sunburned Country," which refers to your former homeland. So this is what he says. He says, "Australia, great country. It has more things that will kill you than anywhere else in the world. Of the world's 10 most poisonous snakes, all are Australian. 5 of its creatures, the funnel-web spider, box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopus, paralysis tick, and stonefish, are the most lethal of their type in the world." Am I selling tourism here, Simon? He goes on. He says, this is a country where even the fluffiest of caterpillars can lay you out with a toxic nip, where seashells will not just sting you, but actually sometimes go after you. Now, if you're not stung or pronged to death in some unexpected manner, you may be fatally chomped by sharks or crocodiles, or be carried helplessly out to sea by irresistible currents, or left to stagger to an unhappy death in the baking outback. It's a beautiful place. It's a great country to live in and visit.
This is before you even go anywhere near Mad Max.
Well, that's right, exactly. So here's this interesting thing.
Darren, are you a little disappointed that you were left off that list of dangerous things in Australia?
That's right. That's my life goal, to make the list. No, well, despite the perils of the Australian outback, there's actually a whole lot of good as well, and that's what we're going to talk about today, obviously. And what I think, we've mentioned this in another podcast, this whole idea of nature as medicine really emerging in the lifestyle medicine space, and has even, been touted as the 7th pillar of lifestyle medicine. And so I thought it'd be fun to look at, hey, what's the evidence? And it's only growing, it's only emerging, but what's the evidence that it's good for us? And then B, which I'm really fascinated by, well, what's the mechanism by which it's having that impact?
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with the evidence. And these can probably be divided, although it's not probably a good thing to divide this, but into the physical and the mental health benefits. And I'd say probably a lot of the work has been done in mental health space, particularly more recently. But we do have those studies, as we know, from or even dating back to the 80s, where it was just that hospital view out a window of nature, and they were documenting that hospital stays were shorter, there was less use of pain-killing medication. And so even we've known this for some time. The 80s, they were a great period of music, but that was a long time ago. So there was early evidence way back then. And then more recently, we've taken interest in somewhat, not the Australian outback, but the forests of Japan. I know you know a little
Yeah.
bit about this. Perhaps you'd like to share a couple of comments about the practice of forest bathing. Have you ever forest
Yeah.
bathed?
Well, not classically in that sense, but I've certainly spent time where I've passed an extended period of time, in a forest or a big park. Sometimes just sitting there, but I can't say I've engaged in the process of forest bathing or shinrin-yoku as we would as we would really understand it.
Mm.
Here's one of the interesting things, Darren. Just think for a moment about doing it. Just picture yourself there. Picture yourself in a forest. Picture yourself surrounded by green. Picture, or perhaps imagine the sound of running water in the background, maybe a small stream or brook. Maybe there's some bird calls that you can hear. I just I just heard some plovers speaking of Australian sounds, some plovers in the background in your audio. I don't know
Yep.
whether our
They don't,
listeners will have heard that.
and they don't kill you. They're non-lethal.
They
The
don't.
plovers.
Oh, they're non-lethal, but they do go after you.
They do. Yes.
Um, so just picture all of that. Call all that to mind, uh, and you're probably starting to feel a little more relaxed already, um, just by imagining that. So if we can induce a sense of pleasure and relaxation simply by calling to mind those natural environments, imagine what actually being in it can do for you. And
Mm.
to follow on from the mental health benefits that you were talking about, I came across a really interesting study in the Journal of Global Health from 2022, so published only a couple of years ago, and it was a scoping review. So taking a large number of existing published papers. The authors initially started with 952 different studies on the effects of nature. Out of those, only about 5%, so in fact less than 5%, 39, met their inclusion criteria for the paper. But of those 39 that met the inclusion criteria, 92% of them demonstrated consistent improvements across any health outcome, and mental health in particular got a gong in 98% of the studies.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's safe to say there is definitely something going on here.
Mm. And look, and from a physiological point of view, for example, you look at forest bathing as an example, where they've found that after a couple of hours, you will see increases in natural killer T cells. And in fact, it's interesting, one
Yeah.
of the studies there has actually shown that remained elevated for about 7 days after that bathing experience,
Yeah.
which is really quite intriguing. But certainly there's been some quite large sort of epidemiological studies that have been conducted. I'm thinking particularly of one back in 2016 in New Zealand, where they actually looked at, in the city of Auckland there, if you got on Google Maps, you could actually see where the blue and green spaces were located and how proximal people resided
Uh-huh.
to those places. And there was every time you doubled the amount of access to green space close proximity to your home, there was about a 400% reduction in depression and anxiety disorders. So there's really powerful. And then more recently, I think the paper was only just published last year in Wales, where they did the similar sort of thing, and this is capturing a population of about 2.3 million people. And once again, they see this proximity to blue and green spaces being really important for people's mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's really good evidence. I mean, there's something that's great about the great outdoors, that's for sure. What's possible? And one thing I'd just love to add before we look at the mechanisms, which I think is the fascinating part, is that I think we often talk about green spaces, but that blue aspect is really powerful. And in fact, I think it was just not last week, the week before, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, one of their member interest groups was on nature as medicine, and they had Wallace Nichols, who wrote the book Blue Mind, And he's really promoting and saying, hey, you know what? He actually, I love this. He has blue marbles that he hands out to people and says, you know, if this, remind yourself, we actually live on a blue planet
A blue
primarily.
planet. Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
and we're humans, we're mostly water. And if you look at, you know, our blood chemistry, it's pretty much similar sort of salinity to seawater. So, you know, there's no surprises. There's something, we're connected to nature. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important that we talk about not just the green spaces, but the blue spaces as well.
Yeah. I
So,
just like to point out here, in the interests of science, that water is not actually blue. Water is clear. It's just refracted light that gives it a blue appearance. That said, the appearance of blue, because we see blue in the sky as well, of course, and the sky clearly is not blue in and of itself. But there's something about the way that light gets refracted in and around our planet that makes the presence of the blue colour so appealing. So appealing.
yeah.
And in fact, I've Darren, I don't know whether you've had this experience on the east coast of Australia recently. There's been a lot of rain. It was a little bit reminiscent of that period of time during the pandemic, where we had a series of east coast lows that seemed to run for month after month after month, and every day was cloudy, grey skies. There was no blue sky visible. Getting any sunlight was certainly out of the question. And my mood dropped tremendously during that period of time, as I think probably a lot of people's did. And I found myself wondering, since we know the importance of sunlight, and we often talk about, you know, getting out in the sun as, you know, good for you and good for your mental health. I wonder also about whether it's simply the sunlight, or whether it's actually a combination of the sunlight and the blue sky that we can enjoy on those kind of bright sunny days. Just before we started recording, I showed you a photo of a walk that we took yesterday here in Madrid, and it's spring here, of course, and the skies are just astonishingly blue, and I found it a real mood booster to be outside and just being able to look up at the blue sky.
Yeah. And you know what? You've sort of launched into definitely one of the mechanisms by which nature might and these blue and green spaces might have such a benefit for us. And that is our sight. So obviously when we move into these spaces, our senses, and we'll talk about some of the others as well, but certainly our eyes are bombarded by a whole lot of things that they find quite pleasing. In fact, and we'll talk about light in just a moment, but even just images and sights, there's been studies, you know, functional MRI studies where they actually see that when they present someone on a screen an urban landscape, a built environment, then the regions of the brain, you know, involved in fight and flight, they react to that. You know, it's not calming. Whereas when they put the bright blue, green, natural environments, there's something very calming about that for our brains. So there's no surprise there. The light thing's really interesting, and I think that, in fact, I talk lots about this, the importance of getting outdoors whilst the sun is shining. And clearly we've known for eons about seasonal affective disorder, which is sort of is what you're describing in Australia, which is our sunburnt right. country. But sometimes, you know, when we have periods of lots of bad weather, it affects your mood. And certainly people living in those high latitude countries during the winter months, it can be really, really debilitating for them. And I often think to myself, you know, we know that the average adult now, and this includes teenagers, are spending well over 90% of their time indoors, where there's not a lot of access to that bright light. And our best guess is that our brains, particularly our emotional brains, probably need about 10,000 lux of light. That's the intensity of light for about 30 minutes each day. And in brightly lit indoor spaces, you're typically not exposed to more than about 500 lux. Whereas you go outside on a bright sunny day, and there can be up to 100,000 lux beaming out there. So So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
lights are really important contributor, I think, to the health benefits of
Yeah.
natural environments. And I think maybe
And so
part
is
of
the
so I was just going to
I was
say,
just going to add there.
mm,
So is the direct impact of sunlight. And our colleague Melissa Sunderman
yes,
often talks about the importance of EMS, early morning sunshine.
yes,
So getting outside into that bright light and the fairly direct sunlight as early as you can in the morning. And one of the mechanisms that seems to be at play there is a kind of a sort of a resetting of your circadian rhythm.
yes,
Once your body has been exposed to bright early morning sunlight, it's almost like everything for the rest of the day is then timed off that. So your body
yes.
knows when to eat, when to rest, when to go to sleep. And that appears to be one of the ways of kind of ensuring that we live in that rhythm that's consistent with our underlying biology.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there because I think that's a really important part, that those circadian cycles and that chronobiology piece. And more literature is coming forward showing that the benefit of that, the importance of that for our health, and certainly that that early morning reset. Light is a really
Yeah,
powerful way to do that. There are other things too. I think the whole chrononutrition space is fascinating, showing that timing of meals can influence our chronobiology, timing of your physical activity can be really important as well. So certainly that one great thing about the outdoor spaces
yeah,
are the other things
yeah.
that come through our optic nerve into our suprachiasmatic nucleus and all the rest of it.
Mm,
But also this
mm.
smell too. You've got some interesting stuff on smell. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I've been devouring Dr. Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die. Actually, when I say devouring, it's probably not the right word there, because it is such a hefty tome. One can only snack on this particular book. It's a very dense, absolutely packed with information. But in it, Dr. Greger mentions that one of the mechanisms that likely accounts for some of the benefit that we get from being in nature, and particularly the idea of forest bathing, is one of the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds emitted by plants and trees in particular, called pinene, Pinene. And pinene you can think of, if you like, as a plant pheromone. So typically, when it comes to speaking about human pheromones, we're not necessarily consciously aware of the aroma of those all the time in our lives, and they in many ways act subconsciously. And very likely pinene does the same thing. So this is where I think it gets really interesting, Darren, because we start to see that there's not just a single pathway or a single mechanism for which these things might bring us benefit, but there are multiple and
Mm.
reinforcing ways in which we get benefits from being in nature.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
What we've already talked about, what we're seeing, potentially what you can hear as well when you're in
Yes.
nature. Think about birds, the sounds of streams, all those kind of sounds that we associate with nature. Now there seems to be a pathway involving aroma and scent. So it's just I love the way in which it appears to be a multi-sensory method of benefit for us.
For sure. And actually, I find the smell one really interesting to me because, we know that the region in your brain responsible for emotional states, like limbic structures, are very much influenced by smell. So I find that connection really intriguing. I remember you're talking about the pheromones, that we humans emit too. We have sort of this plume of around about 2 meters wide that we're all walking around, and it's really quite interesting.
Yours is about 5 meters, I reckon.
That's right, and it's not good, particularly after I've exercised. I was just had a lecture earlier this week, and I was sharing with the university students a study where they had males wear a t-shirt for 3 nights whilst they slept, and then they gave them to females to smell, and the females had to rate how attractive they felt that they found that particular scent. So anyway, the students weren't interested at all in me replicating that study in class. But the interesting thing is what they found is because your pheromone profile can be in sort of mirror your immune profile. And the interesting thing in that study, they found that the females found the smell of males who had very dissimilar immune profiles to them more attractive. The argument is probably that you're attracted to people with different immune characteristics, so that if you manage to procreate, you're going to have a stronger offspring. So anyway, that's it. So look, definitely we know that their senses, sight, sounds, smells, all of those things about nature are really good for us. But there's some other hypotheses as well, some of the other things that are probably going on, and I'm really interested in this whole idea of microbe symbiosis. Because, one of the big learnings, and there's great interest and fascination with this space at the moment, is this connection between bugs, microbes, and us. And in fact, it's really great for your self-esteem to learn that you are probably about, somewhere between 3 to 10 times more bug than you are human because of, how many of these, the gut microbiota that we have. We got up to probably 100 trillion of those in our gut, and also on our skin and everywhere else. And we probably only have about 10 trillion, human cells. But this connection, I'm really intrigued by this connection to in the dirt. There are bugs everywhere. There are bugs, and I think it's Michael Pollan, who wrote the book In Defense of Food. He has this great line where he says, most of your best friends are bugs. Right, because these bugs, they're really, really good for us. And so maybe this explains in part why it is that getting your hands dirty, gardening, for example, seems to be very, very therapeutic for so many people. Are you a gardener?
I'm not currently a gardener, but in general I am, and in particular flowers and vegetables. Things that I love growing.
I've always seen you as a flower kind of guy.
So here's a family story. And I don't know whether this is there's probably a fairly strong social influence here. But my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, who was born in Ireland and came out to Australia as a young man. My mum always used to tell me about how he used to grow carnations for his wife, my mother's mother. So he had a huge carnation bed in their backyard in Bondi in Sydney, and he used to cultivate carnations so that his wife would always have fresh flowers in the house.
Wow, what a man!
Yeah. Well, it's a lovely story, and look, I probably because of that story, I have a particular love of carnations myself, but I love growing any sort of flower, and I love growing any sort of vegetable. One of the really most exciting things about growing plants, at least for me, how quickly you can watch them grow, how quickly you can see the fruits, literally, of your labour. I find that a really, really rewarding part of gardening.
Yeah, it's a way of engaging with life, isn't it? To see growth, it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, so this whole idea of, maybe one of the other mechanisms through which nature's having its good effects is through this interaction we have with the rest of, the biota, that's all throughout there. In fact, I just returned from a lifestyle medicine conference last weekend, and there was a presenter talking about the gut microbiome and health. And one of her key takeaway points at the end was get dirty. That was it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool. It's like, you know what? You want a good thing to do for your health? Get dirty. Go outside. Don't, be constantly, scrubbing your hands and using disinfectant. It's not a bad thing to get dirty from time to time, because most bugs are actually really quite friendly and helpful to us.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are some dangers that lurk. Oh, my little light has suddenly gone out, so I'm in comparative darkness now. Let me see if I can. There we go. That'll help a little bit. There are some dangers to that. I know that there are some bugs that do lurk in the soil that can be bad, particularly if you have open cuts on your hands. So absolutely get out, get in the dirt. Also, be careful of hygiene and making sure that if you've got open wounds on your hands, maybe you put on some gloves or something like that just to protect yourself, because you'll still get lots of other benefits from being out there gardening. It doesn't have to be dirt under your fingernails only that does the job here. But there are certainly a lot of benefits.
Not that I'm advocating this one at all, by the way, but we run a lifestyle medicine course here at the university, and we had one student from Africa, and she said her grandma used to say that whenever you went to a new area or new town, you actually had to have half a teaspoon of dirt. You actually consumed it. I thought, wow, I'm not sure. Wow. I'm not sure if I'll put my hand up for that, but there's often ancient wisdom in.
What was the? Tell me about what's the thinking and the mechanism behind that?
She actually, her grandma used to say it will stop you getting sick, which is quite intriguing.
Maybe it's that idea that you're introducing the local kind of microbes into your body It's kind of a vaccination in a way, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's introducing a small amount in an effort to perhaps provoke an immune response in some way.
Yeah, and to cultivate a particular type of microbiome, gut microbiome.
Yeah. So I've got a question for you, Darren.
Yeah.
We're talking about all these different sensory means of experiencing nature and all the benefits that we can derive from that. We talked, for example, about hearing the sounds of nature, birds, water running, and so on. What if you're hearing impaired? We talked about getting out and seeing blue and green. What if you're visually impaired? Does that mean that you can't experience those benefits? Well, I've asked you a question. I've also got an answer for you, or at least part of an answer. part of an answer. And this idea, of course, has already, or this question has already been asked, and others have already begun to examine it. But about 7 or 8 years ago, a researcher from Exeter University in the UK was interested in the question: how do people living with visual impairment experience nature during their lives? And that arose out of a concern that anecdotally people with visual impairment were expressing often a sense of disconnection from nature, difficulty in experiencing that. So she undertook a study, and interestingly, when they were introduced to natural settings, the study cohort with a visual impairment, they reported feeling a sense of freedom from the anxiety-inducing environments that they might usually spend time in. They also experienced a sense of relief and freedom from what were described as narrow social attitudes about visual impairment or blindness. And they also felt that they were able to skill up by using other senses to, in a sense, kind of navigate their way in those natural environments. So at least in part, I think that begins to answer the question for us. If you have some sort of physical impairment, whether it's vision, sight, touch, smell, whatever it might be, can you still experience the benefits of nature? And at least provisionally, I think the answer seems to be absolutely yes.
Yes.
And we should be encouraging it.
For sure. And, it's interesting when you look at, we talked about light's ability to reset chronobiology.
Yeah.
We now know that even light exposure to skin. So there's these peripheral clocks as well, which can help reset our circadian cycles. So
yeah. You know how that information was uncovered?
No.
It was a research study, or at least initially, it was a research study on a type of blind mole. So one of those sightless moles that kind of simply doesn't have eyes at all, and therefore can't visually perceive light. But experiments were done with different light frequencies, and different effects were uncovered.
Wow.
Hence the skin hypothesis.
What a debt of gratitude we have to the blind mole.
And you never even knew it.
I didn't. Hey, so let's move on to our last mechanism and there are obviously the amount of mechanisms that I imagine are myriad, but so we've talked about how being in natural environments, obviously we're receiving sensory cues. There's probably that microbiota symbiosis thing going on there. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this. And look, this might be considered, we're getting a bit fringe now maybe, and so it's not like we're hanging a hat on this. But there's this whole concept of earthing. What do you think about earthing? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So when I first came across earthing, I thought it was pretty fringy myself, and I even said as much to a friend and colleague, Michael Schultz, who's also a health coach, and also very, 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 very interested in and steeped in the benefits that nature can bring us. He actually lives in a particularly beautiful part of the world in Asheville, North Carolina. I mentioned my skepticism to Michael, and he more or less spun around in his chair and said, "Are you kidding? This stuff is real." And when I did a little more digging around it, there does seem to be some, at least at this stage in my mind, some strong correlational links between earthing and our own internal health and well-being. And there's two ways that I'm thinking about this. One is my own remembered experience of walking on bare ground with bare feet, and I'm not talking about walking on rocky or gravelly forest trails that really hurt the soles of your feet, but I'm talking about walking on grass or walking on sand. Those sorts of experiences feel good. I will say that there are also some experiences similar to that that don't feel good. For example, have you ever walked out, Darren, into a lake? And I'm almost squirming as I say this, and you put your foot down, and it's kind of muddy and squelchy, and maybe there's some bits of, I don't know, reeds or seagrass or whatever under your feet. I really dislike that feeling, and I think partly it's fear as well. I think partly because I can't see where I'm walking, part of my mind is thinking what could be lurking beneath the surface here. A little like the way this conversation started.
That's right.
One of those.
You can move on from that fear now. That's correct. In Australia, and literally in my local lake, there are the blue-ringed octopuses, and you don't want to get stung by one of those things, let me tell you. So, yeah, I can understand that. And obviously, probably should have prefaced this whole practice of earthing is the idea that, hey, you know what? We often wear rubber-soled shoes. We're disconnected from the earth. Any other electrical device needs to be plugged into the earth, connected. And in some ways, there's the truth. We are electrical devices. I mean, I have my students. I love doing looking at electromyographic activity, where we put electrodes on people and they can track their arms, and we see all the electrical activity. We've got EEGs and ECGs or EKGs. We are electrophysiologically active. That's how we are constructed. So, look, there's some. I agree. There's some. I wouldn't say there's certainly not high quality studies done yet, but there is some that have shown that, for example, when people are earthed, they respond better to vaccinations. There are some, their glycemic control might be slightly improved. So, you know what, even if it's just at the moment emerging evidence, there is something pretty cool about walking down the beach bare feet.
Absolutely. Or walking through the park with bare feet as well. And there seems to be enough emerging inklings to make us want to dig a little deeper and
for sure
and start to conduct some more high quality studies that might unearth a connection between these two things.
Well, that was well played. Hats off for that. All right, so we've been talking about the mechanisms, and the truth is we've just got so much more to learn about this space, and I think that it's a really exciting space though, and certainly I know that my happy place is being active in nature, outdoors. I crave, but more so blue than green, to be honest. But what I really love, and that's maybe to wrap this up, I like how you sort of say, what does this matter for lifestyle medicine? How does this all fit in? And I like the big picture. So tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one of the things that I think is really important here is that human beings we're not single activity creatures. We don't just do a single thing at a time, unless we choose to. I mean, we can certainly choose to be focused in that way and do a single activity. But as my younger son said to me many years ago, while we were walking down the beach one day, isn't it funny how when you walk, you start to talk?
Yeah.
Which is very, very true. And the truth of that, really landed on me quite strongly at that time, which led me, I will say, to start my own particular methodology of engaging in psychological treatment at that time when I was practicing as a psychologist. And I called that trail talk. And the idea was exactly that. You don't sit in an office and have a consult. You get out and start walking and have a consult. And this is what happens, isn't it? We get into the park, and yes, you can walk through a park by yourself, but more likely you're going to be walking with a friend or a family member. You're likely also to be, if you're walking on a spring day or a summer day, you're also likely to be drinking some water to keep yourself well hydrated. If you make a bit of a stellar effort, like I did yesterday, 23,000 steps yesterday, then at the end of the day, you feel hungry for some, nutritious food. So now we're starting to get all of these kind of collected pathways in lifestyle medicine that are interacting with each other and potentiating each other in ways that would be very difficult to predict individually, I think. And this is, for me, this is the joy of lifestyle medicine. The joy of lifestyle medicine is that we talk about the pillars, diet, exercise, sleep, and so on. But we need to think about these things, I think, not so much as pillars, which stand individually and apart from each other, but we need to think of them as segments of a pie, for example, where they're each touching the other parts and interacting with the other parts. And that's where the true benefit, I think, of lifestyle medicine comes from.
For sure. And I think that's a great way to give a call to action. I think it's time to get outside.
Absolutely.
It's getting the sun's coming down for me. It's probably just coming up for you.
It's coming up for me. It's going to be 32 degrees here today. So I'm heading out into the sun soon.
I'm envious.
Yeah, there's one more thing I think you should do today too, Darren. I think you should exercise your positive psychology muscles and write a gratitude letter to the blind rats of the world.
All right. Challenges accepted.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.